Alright, have you ever noticed that there is a specific figure that is featured prominently in the Elden Ring artwork, but in the final game turns out to be nothing more than a side character? However, signs of his relevance still remain, as this Knight of the Round Table, known as Vyke, was a tarnished who came closest to becoming the new Elden Lord, but fell victim to the madness of the Frenzied Flame, corrupted by the Three Fingers, yet becoming neither Elden Lord nor Lord of Chaos. His wandering spirit remaining around the corpse of the maiden he once sought to protect, and his original form remains as well in an Evergaol, wielding the dragon lightning of his beloved Lanciax. So, if Vyke was originally meant to be a main character, how about we follow in his footsteps to succeed where he has failed? And no, I'm not talking about a simple cosplay run where we just poke around using a spear like a normal weapon. I mean, that's not how we do things on this channel. Here we do things in an unnecessarily convoluted way, after all. Therefore, we're only going to use his spear's unique madness-inducing weapon art, and when it comes to the Frenzied Flame incantations, I can only use those once I acquire the Frenzied Flame seal after getting a little squeeze from the Three Fingers. Actually, even then I was a bit reluctant when it comes to using those spells, as you will see. Moreover, we need to go on a bit of an adventure if we truly want to walk in his footsteps in order to surpass him. First we acquire a spear, then his armor in the mountaintop of the giants. Then we need to get imbued by the Flame of Frenzy by meeting the Three Fingers and acquire the Frenzied Seal. However, after that we're going to acquire Miquella's Needle by doing Millicent's questline in order to remove this curse, returning to Vyke's original state as a dragon lightning imbued champion, which we'll then use to dethrone the first Elden Lord and then claim the throne for ourselves. Now, of course, we are not actually Vyke himself. In fact, in order to replace him, we will have to kill him. Twice. And also his beloved Lanciax, because, well, why the hell not? So I guess in a sense, instead of passing on his legacy, we're passing water over it. Like fulfilling the dying wish of an abusive parent out of spite or something.
Now I'll finish the work that Father began. I will surpass him. I will destroy him.
Well, like the actual lore of this game, it's all kind of up in the air. Which, ironically, I will be as well for most of the playthrough, using this awkward jump attack. And you will see exactly how madness-inducing it's going to be. There might be more to it than you realize. This is Elden Ring, following in Vyke's footsteps. Alright, we start off as a confessor of the tragedies of men, and with a way too obscure alias, which would have been more suitable for a sleep-related run, but you know there's not much you can do with the name Vyke. Now obviously we're going to go through all of the usual shenanigans you do at the start of pretty much any playthrough, but even though I do make my way to the ball farming spot, my intention was to not do any arbitrary leveling. On top of that, although I did acquire a memory stone for future Frenzied Flame incantations, which Vyke actually uses, 3 of them at least, I did not want to include things like Golden Vow or Flame Grant Me Strength and whatnot. I mean, I already require a very specific incantation to even acquire Vyke's Spear in the first place. And of course, in order to wield Vyke's Spear at all, we do need to acquire runes to level up to the required stats. But instead of dropping balls, I decided to drop the Knight Cavalry Knight. After all, life in general is a lot easier before your balls drop. I actually wonder if you can sleep this guy, because then he would be the Nighty Night Knight. Regardless, it's also very satisfying to make enemies suffer the wrath of gravity that we as players had to experience ourselves so many times before. Not anymore, of course, because by now I've done this so many times. Oh. Well, given that we don't have any means of attacking yet, we will also need to use the dickishness of gravity. Is that proper English? Okay, well then the Charles Dickensness of gravity, in order to literally take down the first version of Vyke. Well, the second version chronologically, but you know what I mean. However, even the almighty force of gravity needs a helping hand to make this mighty yet already fallen foe fall down even further. Especially because his constant spamming of frenzy will quickly drive you crazy, or even over the edge. Oh, oops. That was not what I intended. Huh? Oh? Huh. Alright, there we go. Exactly as planned. Now, it's going to take a while until we can acquire his armor as well. So as a suitable alternative, we're going to wear the outfit of his deceased maiden that he tried to save by corrupting himself with the Frenzied Flame. But then she died anyway, the unthankful harpy. Some people. So I think this is a nice way to honor Vyke's sacrifice. You know, just like how Caesar's Discharge appreciates us wearing his dead sister's clothing. What is unfortunate, however, is that it comes with this ridiculously looking headwear.
Now you're gonna die wearing that stupid little hat. How does it feel?
However, this outfit has a benefit that I didn't even realize at the time. Namely that it has very high resistance to madness buildup, which we inflict upon ourselves each time we use the weapon art of Vyke's spear. In fact, I initially thought that madness buildup wouldn't be much of an issue in this run at all. However, that all changed after acquiring Vyke's personal armor. And again, his spear's weapon art will be our only source of damage for the majority of the playthrough. Moreover, as I said before, in general I didn't want to stray away too far from things that Vyke himself would reasonably use. But that also includes an additional rule. We are not allowed to remove the madness buildup with a bolus. Mainly because that word in Dutch is actually a slang term for a pile of shit. So consuming that would be more of a German thing. Well, our spear is still at +0, which would be fine if we could actually poke with it. But hey, how bad could the weapon art be? I mean, you cannot actually inflict madness on, well, practically any boss in this game. But even without frenzy, I'm still emboldened by the flame of ambition.
Put these foolish ambitions to rest.
Screw you guys, I'm going home.
Well, if we want to rise from the status of lowly tarnish to the glory of Elden Lord, what we need is a teacher who can show us the way of the warrior. And whenever a Dutch guy feels low, he will need some pot to get high and mighty, and Alexander is the right pot for the job. So, after a very friendly sparring match, completely consensual, he left me a token of his fighting spirit. And he went off to live out his days on a pot farm. And YouTube, I am referring to actual pots, like jars. I mean, you could literally see that on screen. Context matters, don't demonetize me this time. Look, I'm even drinking from a juice box. Which I behind the scenes filled with a more appropriate type of drink, mohaha. So we're definitely keeping things PG-13 or whatever it's called. Alright, then let's pop some poppable rune souls to upgrade to +4. And yes, I realize that you can upgrade somber weapons basically to +9 from the start. But just like I want to level up organically, I don't want to overdo it with upgrades either. In fact, we don't even need to, because if we cleverly sneak around the enemies here and kill it, we can boost fire damage by acquiring the tier from the Earth Tree avatar. We can acquire the bubble tier from the Earth Tree avatar in the Weeping Peninsula, so that we don't die in one hit. Speak of which, we can already survive some damage against this one, because it's skilled for early game, which allows us to inflict some decent amount of damage this time. But as you can see, the problem with this attack is that it's very slow and leaves you vulnerable not merely during the animation itself, but it also has quite a bit of recovery time on top of that. And even though it comes across as if it's a jump attack, it most definitely is not. As you will see later on in the playthrough, the wind-up that this attack has, which a jump attack does not, is going to provide me with some additional problems, not to mention the muscle memory issues. But at least the bubble tier will allow me essentially a free attack, where the bubble can tank the incoming damage on my behalf. And that's a good thing, because other than the damage still not being all that impressive, but here's the real kick in the nets, especially when you're locked on, you cannot really control the direction of your jump, and it places me right in front of an incoming attack. What the hell? On top of that, the way you're positioned is different than after a normal jump attack. So a lot of things that can go over your head after a jump attack do not necessarily miss you after doing this weapon art. And when it comes to the damage that I inflict upon the boss, it's strangely inconsistent. First of all, to what extent the boss gets hit by the lingering flames on the floor plays a significant part, but also whether or not you hit him with the actual spear itself. which on top of that is a double hitbox, when you jump up and when you land, which has an additional quirk as you will see later on. So the damage is kind of all over the place. Therefore I try to make use of my minimalist approach, which you should be familiar with if you've seen my previous level 1 deadly poison video, where I only counterattack after very specific attacks that Margit does. Which is obviously not as effective this time, and also made the fight last quite a long time. But eventually I could claim victory over the first great enemy in the game, which grants me another talisman slot. And that's a good thing because with only one I had to sacrifice Radiant Seal for the Jar Shard. But now with the extra boost in health I could return to the Earthtree avatar in Caelid and put up an actual fight. And by making clever use of the tree in the middle to block incoming projectiles, somewhat, victory would be assured since I wouldn't die in a single hit anymore. So as I was saying about the additional talisman slot, given that I cannot boost the frenzy part of the attack, I need to increase the intensity of the flame. So I made my way past Discount Smo, or Albertine Huismerk Smo as we would say over here, in order to acquire the Fire Scorpion charm for a 15% increase in fire damage. And while I was here anyway, I made sure to pick up more golden seeds and poppable runes. After all, Margit arose from the grave, or randomly from a random guy in a random place, to taunt me that my flame was still too meager. So I kinda decided to upgrade to +6 already. Alright, first try, nice. So, now on top of the 15% from the charm, we get an additional fire boost from the Crystal Tear. And the damage increase was definitely noticeable against Godric, especially the damage that the Lingering Flames do per tick after your attack. On top of that, Godric has larger attack windows than Margit, well other than the wind AoE of course. So this was actually a very manageable fight this way. However, what I thought would be really cool was to use this weapon art to jump over Godric's ground AoE, where he smashes his axe down, because that would be perfect for the intro cinematic. So, well, instead of finishing him off, I was waiting for him to do that, and waiting, and practically dying in the process because for some reason he just refused to do it. What the hell? Just do your AoE! However, then the biggest kick in the nuts was that he does a different version of that attack in his second phase. So the result was not exactly what I wanted. I mean, I tanked through it, but that kinda looked like garbage. And yeah, he's dead now, so I don't have the footage I wanted. Yeah, that's not acceptable. So I did what any sensible person would do at this point. Start all over again and this time make sure to wait for that attack in his first phase. And there we go. Yeah, now that's epic. Yeah, that was worth it, I think. Maybe. More. Well, normally I would go to Rhea Lucaria for the second Great Rune. But I thought I would change things up a bit and go to Radahn instead. Not the smartest decision, I guess, since, as you probably know, I'm not all that skilled at Radahn fight. Hey, hello. Okay, sister, one of us is going to have to change. That's peculiar, by the way. Alexander's not here. Huh. Wonder what happened to him.
Are you good and prepared, young chum?
Who are you calling a chum, you son of a biscuit? Okay, I'll just do it myself then. I'm sure I'll be fine. Ish. Well, the damage is fine-ish, I suppose. And Radahn is slow enough in principle to make my own slow attack and long recovery time feasible. Except for the quick attack that, well, even in regular melee fights tend to catch me off guard as well. So a little bit of favorable RNG goes a long way to preserve my very valuable shield, given how low my vigor still is. Fortunately, or unfortunately given how bad it will make you feel, you can target poor old Leonard when he is summoning his gravity magic. Although that only provides a single attack opportunity that is actually safe. So, having to do the rest of the fight without my shield made things a little tense. But I did manage to get him into his final phase. I even dodged the wave this time, believe it or not. Well, speaking of which, just like against Godric, I tried to be a little too fancy and I attempted to jump over that wave using my weapon art. However, given that I already tend to mistime that when doing an actual jump with the X button, doing it with an artificial jump that has an actual wind-up, rather than coming out immediately, kinda resulted in a wave of disappointment. Well, I was even more disappointed when I once more lost my shield early on in the fight. Yet I still managed to get him to his meteorite phase, regardless. And then it was almost like something clicked. because you guys know how much I tend to struggle with this part of the fight. However, I decided this time to horse around a bit in this phase. I mean, Vyke was a knight of the round table, so I'm sure he rode a horse at one point or another. I mean, come on. The fight took quite a long while this way though. However, each time he had to summon the giant boulders, that would give me another safe attack opportunity. But that did imply having to survive for a very long time. In fact, I didn't even know he could do this, but he went back into his meteorite form. I honestly thought that was merely a phase transition, but evidently it is an actual attack that is part of his third phase. You know what? This might be the first time where I felt like I had a satisfying performance against Radahn. So I think I'm allowed to tap myself on the empty space where normally a shoulder would have been if I hadn't been structured like a Raymond character. I mean, a little bit of pride should be allowed. Then again, pride does come before the fall. And after acquiring the third talisman slot from that lady that sings "Only Time," and then quickly tanking my way towards the ritual sword talisman, which wouldn't even be the best talisman given how often I wouldn't be at full health anyway. But I then made my way to the Draconic Tree Sentinel. And although my damage output was much higher than I expected, given that this boss has quite a bit of fire resistance, it simply didn't matter, because no matter how much damage I did to him, he did much more to me. Because unlike the previous bosses, other than just getting lucky where the boss just happens to miss you or happens to not counterattack, but whenever he did do a follow-up, he would hit me while I was still in my recovery animation. None of my usual attack windows worked. The closest I got to a safe attack opportunity was when he did the double shield bash, using some really strict timing. Unfortunately, that's not the type of attack that he tends to spam a lot. Yeah, this fight was quite a mess. Not even the extra health from switching back to Radicant Seal would do much. In fact, I feared that not even some extra levels from killing a few other bosses first would be sufficient. But maybe that, combined with a little break, would give me that little leeway that could allow me to suffer through this encounter. Because obviously going through the Valiant Gargoyles would have been even worse. Therefore I decided to go through the first section of Millicent's questline first, because I would eventually need Miquella's needle, and it takes quite a few steps before you can acquire it. Not to mention the final step being to defeat Malenia. Now, you might think that O'Neill would be even worse than the Draconic Tree Sentinel, with all his little minions around, but you can actually defeat this boss pacifist style by using the environment against him, which is how I would have started a smoke or mist damage only run, which I still haven't done almost a year later, by the way. Even though it was what I originally wanted to do for my very first challenge run. And in all honesty would probably have worked out better than my botched Holy Only run. But I digress. The point is that O'Neill may be immune to rot, but not immune to exploding geysers of the same stuff. So you can just calmly take him on a tour of Miyazaki's favorite type of environment. Hey, what the hell? You cannot resummon your summons outside of the arena here? Don't you hate it when someone uses extremely cheap tactics to achieve... Well, the first step of this questline is complete at least. Gosh dang it, I need a drink. Yeah, that's good apple cider, good apple juice. However, after getting Millicent her prosthetic, in order to continue our questline, I would be required to defeat another boss with very narrow attack windows. And although I would have given my right arm for some help, I was not going to summon Millicent to lend me a hand, since I knew her death would be guaranteed at the end of her questline. So I chose to keep her at arm's length instead. Sure, she might be up in arms because of that, but you gotta hand it to me. I do in fact possess the kind of determination required to find the elbow room necessary to get my attacks in with relative safety. Or, I would just need to get lucky with the RNG, I suppose. Well, that wasn't going to be sufficient to survive this ordeal. However, after tanking through a few attacks, I did manage to survive into the stretchy noodle phase, which I don't really get. I suppose that the god he skinned happened to be the flying spaghetti monster. But whatever may be the case, I would obviously run out of healing flasks way before I could finish the fight. However, then I noticed something about the attack where he is helicoptering towards you. Perhaps with some precise timing, I could turn that into a sufficiently safe attack opportunity. And it better be, because I ran out of all my healing flasks. And on top of that, the lock-on would screw me over, or better said, could screw me over. As I definitely would need to hit him with the spear itself as well, not merely the fire AoE. So what I had to do was to roll through, release the lock-on, and manually aim myself towards his lower body. And then I would be able to recover just in time to roll out of his incoming counterattack. Alright, by the skin of my teeth I did make it through, and I got a decent amount of runes from that. But in all fairness, still not enough to make an actual difference against the Draconic Tree Sentinel. But hey, at least I did make sure that Millicent wouldn't have to go out on a limb to get rid of her apostle problem. So, no skin off my back. Nevertheless, we still need to give the Tree Sentinel a Draconic treatment, and given that a few extra levels are not going to be sufficient to grant me victory, I attempted to give myself the best start possible by sneaking up behind him, so that I could get 3 attacks in before the boss could counterattack. And that way I would still have my shield intact. God damn it. Well, that would have been the case if I hadn't been such a dumb dick and I lost my shield because I got caught on the edge of the shockwave of his weapon. Crapalicious. Okay, so it's not the best start possible, but it's a decent start at least. So then I would make sure to attack his shield side, to at least have the biggest chance of getting away in time. Nothing guaranteed, but I should at least make sure that the chances are in my favor, not against me. Of course, it would also help a lot if I wouldn't take completely random, unnecessary and preventable hits. Well, at least some damage could be tanked. I mean, this fight was not going to be about not getting hit at all, but more about tanking minimal damage, so that I can last throughout the entire fight. And although you would think that it would be a problem that his damage output increases once he powers himself up with Dragon Lightning, it actually turned out that he had a truly safe attack window in his second phase. When you attack his shield side and he scrapes his weapon across the ground, you have just enough time to dodge the incoming wave and then run away from the giant charge attack. And it also turns out that he is far more likely to do that move if you stick to his shield side. On top of that, the lightning phase has a time limit, so when he's back to his first phase, he will inflict less damage again. And when he goes back into his lightning phase, you will have that safe attack opportunity again. Therefore, I chose to make use of my most tried and true skill, being patient. After all, under these circumstances, you either are patient or you'll be turned into a patient. A lengthy endeavor, but I still finished with 3 healing flasks to spare. So I suppose that Mr. Sentinel was barking up the wrong tree, and I was able to pick the fruits of my labor. Or something, I don't know. At least I could enter the capital now. And on top of that, the next boss fight was a nice little break, because even though using a slow attack turns boss fights into puzzles, this one has a very easy solution. Simply wait for Godfrey to spin his axe around. Unless he does the quick push attack, he won't be able to hit you after that. And of course, I had to make sure that I would end the fight by jumping over his AoE Geronimo style. Or Cowabunga, as the Pope might say in this world. Or yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker, but we're way past Christmas already at this point. And yes, I count that as a Christmas movie. The damage output against Morgoth was not exactly spectacular, but there was at least a very obvious clear opening, namely right after his jump attack, which he tends to do nearly every single time after throwing his spear, at least in his first phase. However, after he does his Sword of Damocles meets Gates of Babylon attack, that's no longer the case. Now he can still do that, but most of the time he will now follow up with a spear charge. On top of that, I messed up and lost my shield, so I couldn't make use of my quote-unquote free attack. However, there's another way to make use of his spear throw, namely that there's a safe zone right in front of him. And that was the opening I needed, although I would still require strict timing and reaction time after recovering, otherwise I would still take damage. Fortunately, he can also respond by jumping away, meaning you don't even have to react to anything to begin with. Unfortunately, since you're launching yourself into the air with this attack, it can also mean impaling yourself upon a spear before you can even throw it. Now in the third phase he gains his blood sword attacks, however the stab version is too quick to be truly safe. And his still swipe does not go over your head, unfortunately. Now at least that does less damage than his sword, so it's still safer to land behind him. The downside is that if you don't hit him with the spear itself, you will only do minor damage from the lingering flames. Meaning the fight will take a very long time this way. But at least if I only take damage from a tail swipe now and then surely nothing can go wrong, right? Craptastic. Well, I got close, and I'm sure there's nothing else that could go wrong. Crapalicious, I stopped short before I was in the actual safe zone. Okay, wait for delayed attacks after a tail swipe and make sure my spacing on the spear throws is correct. But that should be sufficient. I mean, surely nothing else could go possibly wrong. And that was the liquid type of crap from the diarrhea arena. You know what? I say frick it. Well, I say it like that because of YouTube, but I say frick it. I'm going down into the sewers to get a +7 stone. And then together with a +8 and +9 from Caled, we can get a nearly fully upgraded spear. So, to remain in the spirit of Christmas, or whatever, you know, a very late Christmas song in Morgoth's honor or something. Go frick yourself, go frick yourself, go frick yourself, go frick yourself. Alright, first try, nice. So now finally the time has come to face Vyke in his prime. Because if we want to become like him, we will need to wear his armor. Which is actually going to change this playthrough in quite a significant way. And not the way I thought it would. Because you would think that it would be an improvement. And it kinda wasn't. Now to be fair, I'm not sure if I've ever fought the version of Vyke inside the Why not just call it a Jill or something? But you would expect him to be quite a threat, given that he was the Tarnished that came closest to becoming Elden Lord. Well, he doesn't look all that threatening, to be honest. Except that he can heal, and that he can two-shot me. Huh. Well, that's something at least. But what exactly is he capable of other than just poking with a spear? So let's see what kind of moves he got. Hello? Are you going to do something?
He's just standing there, menacingly!
Well, then kiss my ass. Oh, you backside stabbing son of a biscuit. Yeah, I guess it's because I'm wearing his beloved maiden's outfit. Yeah, dirty old Vyke. I guess he wanted to do more than just protect that holy hiney. So something else he can do is light himself on lightning? Is that proper English? I mean, you would say light yourself on fire. And he can also summon lightning bolts, but for some reason not the red variety. Well, that's quite shocking. Well, he is supposed to be able to use Vortex's lightning spears, but no matter how much I ran around, he just wouldn't use them. However, he did eventually use the alternate version of the weapon art that we've been using all this time, which is the Storm Assault. Basically the same attack, but instead of fire and madness, it is wind and lightning. At least if you do it after lighting yourself on lightning. Okay, well, no demonstration of Vortex's lightning spear. Which is strange, by the way, that he does have that ability, but he cannot use Lanciax's glaive. Because lore-wise, it is said that Vyke was the one that Lanciax loved the most. The cheating bastard, going after Godwyn's beloved dragon instead. Maybe it's a good thing that he never became Elden Lord. I think that the deepest lore is that he was a bit of a horn dog. Or perhaps the true deepest lore is that Vortex was named after the fact that Vyke only used him for the sex. Well, unfortunately his original spear is not in the game, so near the end of the playthrough we will need an alternative. But at least now we do have his armor, the fingerprint set, so you would think we would now have the benefit of a better defense. However, that's not really the case, because apparently the Maiden set had a very high frenzy resistance, whereas Vyke's armor makes you especially vulnerable to it. So until now, the madness buildup wasn't much of an issue, well, basically at all. But from now on, it's quite literally going to drive me crazy. Especially because some really tough boss fights are coming up. After all, we mainly do fire damage, and next on the list are Moog and the Fire Giant. And testing it out on the Fire Giant, oh my. This is indeed going to drive me nuts. Well, in order to set the Earth Tree on fire afterwards anyway, we need to get the Frenzied Flame to remain theme appropriate. In essence, in this playthrough, Melina is not our maiden. In fact, we need another maiden to acquire the Frenzied Seal, namely Hayata. Makes sense, by the way, that she would be my maiden, because I somehow tend to do better with ladies who have poor eyesight. So it is nice for a change to not get the usual response for what. This video is sponsored by Prozac for the inevitable crippling depression you get from existing. Well, speaking of getting sick, part of a questline was to defeat a specific invader, and other than it being nice for a change to actually inflict madness on someone, there were raw meat dumplings, which, although I just picked them up because they were shiny, these items would actually prove to be useful later on. But something that already was making me sick was the thought of having to deal with Moog's massive fire resistance in order to even reach the Three Fingers. Now, at least he doesn't have a health pool as giant as the Fire Giant's health pool, but it's still a lot of HP to go through, and especially to survive for such a long time. As Moog is the master of delayed attacks, and also inflicts a lot of damage. Even potential bleed damage if I get caught in his fire, whereas him getting caught in my fire will not inflict any madness upon him. Now, at the very least, because he is rather slow, a lot of times you do get enough time to recover, and by using Moog's Shackle, you can get 2 additional 3 hits in, so together with sacrificing your shield, that would be 3 hit. Just a little more than a couple of safe attacks. On top of that, one benefit of Vyke's armor is that the highest elemental resistance happens to be fire. And it also has very high robustness, which massively reduces the bleed buildup. So it's at least a good thing that this set doesn't merely have downsides. But both my low damage output and the high madness buildup really drag out this fight. And the longer it takes, the lower you get on resources. However, remember the raw meat dumplings we've picked up earlier? Now, those might poison you, but they also heal you. So if you simply heal the poison, that means you have additional healing items. And hey, the rule was not to use boluses to cure madness, not poison. And I mean, come on, Vyke was a human, so he had to eat like anyone else. And yeah, I know, it does mean that I still consume a slang term for a pile of shit. But when you think about it, eating raw meat dumplings will already make your dumpling dumper act like, well, something like that. Wow, that fight took no less than 15 minutes. But with Moog out of our way, nothing would stand in between us and the Three Fingers. An interesting detail, by the way, is that Vyke, canonically, wore this specific set of armor when he met the Three Fingers. Because his armor is melted in the same pattern as your skin is scorched, given that for some reason we cannot wear anything. Perhaps that is why this outer god realized that Vyke wasn't suitable to become the Lord of Frenzied Flame? They just didn't know exactly what it was, as they couldn't put their finger on it. Or perhaps I'm just getting trolled by Hayata, because it's pretty telling that after making her vomit before, she now practically begs me to take my clothes off. And yet, I still end up getting burned. Well, then again, what goes around comes around, I suppose. Mahahaha. Ironically, even though I'm literally preventing Melina from burning herself, she is still pissed off at me. Kind of a missed opportunity in my opinion that there is no secret ending available when you actually remove the influence of the Three Fingers, using Miquella's needle, and then become Elden Lord. After all, Melina would then still be alive. Regardless, we now have the Frenzied seal, and therefore we finally are able to expand our arsenal with 3 of the 5 Frenzied Flame incantations. Given that Vyke himself doesn't use the other 2, so neither will I. But it is still the case that we need to get past the Fire Giant in order to burn the Earth Tree. And in the end, these incantations are still nothing more than pure fire damage. Regardless, after watching 2 Frenzied Flame incantations only videos, I thought that the Fire Giant would not give me any trouble when using Flame of Frenzy. However, there was a massive difference here. Given that my build was evidently not optimized at all to get the maximum amount of damage, and I was not going to use additional buffs or farm levels to put into Faith. I suppose that was the true beam in my eye here. On top of that, I had an additional problem. The madness buildup was insanity inducing. Not only was my damage low and my attack slow, I constantly had to wait for the buildup to go down. Moreover, it's pretty hard to tell if your next attack is going to push you over the edge. So even though I just got my 5 fingers on the true power of the 3 fingers, I decided to give my new frenzy powers one specific finger and ditch all of my FP flash instead. Sounds extremely counterintuitive, but here's the thing. The spear's weapon art can still be used when you're out of FP. It will simply not have a fire AoE around it, but it will still do thrust damage. Which is a lower damage output, but the majority of the damage came from the physical part anyway. But the point is that now I didn't have to worry about the madness buildup. Well, at least not in-game. Because even though strategy-wise the fight was not all that different from a regular melee fight, it was much slower. And it just went on and on and on, and it kept going and going and going until I just felt the madness build up inside of my own brain. It once more took about 15 minutes, but then finally this giant pain in the dick succumbed to my pointy stick. However, as you probably already expected, the boss fight after this was going to be much worse, and a similar strategy definitely would not be viable for those two. In fact, the spear, even with FP, wasn't all that viable. I thought it would be because in theory you can hit them through the pillars. But in practice, yeah, it would take a lot of practice to even get any meaningful results. Perhaps. Now, the Flame of Frenzy incantation was the most viable damage-wise, especially because you can occasionally hit both of them at once. And although strategy-wise it's once more very viable in theory, but in practice it will make your head explode. The damage output would be tolerable if you could simply keep attacking, but the madness buildup is so damn high, and each time you frenzy yourself, you lose valuable health and FP, while leaving yourself completely vulnerable. I mean, it's already pretty standard to be in deep shite when facing the disaster duo, but this time I was in it up to my eyeballs. Now, one specific talisman that would have been helpful here is Godfrey's icon, because whenever I can, I try to charge the Flame of Frenzy. But come on, that would have required you to defeat Godfrey. I mean, what the hell is that even about? That sounds like beating up the demigod that had to take the special bus to Raya Lucaria. It's just wrong on every conceivable level. Pure fractal wrongness. So no, that wasn't even an option. That did mean that it took about an hour of attempts and an almost 8-minute fight, but eventually I got lucky enough to survive. So I wish I could say that I didn't even bat an eye, but in all honesty I almost went down in flames before they did. But at least the worst boss fight was over now. But in my eyes at least, we could now go from this ginormous frickfest to my favorite boss fight in the game. And, very importantly, to pick up a somber ancient dragonstone to finally upgrade my spear to +10. So, quick mental note, make sure not to forget to actually go and upgrade it. However, maybe the madness finally went to my head, but I actually made the decision to ditch the Frenzied Flame seal altogether. Because even though it helped me out greatly against Tweedledee and Tweedledum, but especially against such an amazing enemy like Malekith, I didn't want to essentially win by quite literally looking at him from a distance.
I am not a spectator! I am a warrior!
You can never read that guy.
Well, for the first phase, the most obvious attack opportunity would be after the slow sideswipe, which is my favorite attack opportunity in general, to be honest. I also tried to jump over the Beast Claw attack, which you can also do with a regular jump after all. And it could potentially work, but that's quite a timing issue. In fact, even attacking after the slow sideswipe already had a bit of a timing issue. Therefore I decided to play things a bit safer. After all, if you get hit during the second phase, you take additional damage from death. Which sounds kinda peculiar. Like, hey, you don't look so good. Yeah, I picked up a little bit of death and it's kind of uncomfortable. Well, in the second phase I essentially went for my main go-to attack opportunity as well, namely doing the combo with the slow overhead attack. However, once again some very strict timing was required to get out of the incoming destined death attack, given that you can't predict if he's going to do that or not. Although he does have a tendency at least to alternate between doing and not doing it at the end of the combo. So because the timing was so strict and I wasn't so sure about any other safe attack opportunities, I tried to be patient and hope that I wouldn't sustain too much damage, while waiting for him to do that attack again. And that shouldn't be that much of an issue, as I've had to survive against Malekith for long periods of time before. However, I experienced this weird glitch where I suddenly kept screwing up and mistiming everything. I'm not talking about a glitch in the game, I mean that I probably quite literally fried my own brain from all this self-induced frenzy and frustration in the previous fight. So all in all, I ended up without any healing flash left. Yet Malekith still had a third of his health bar remaining. And I had like, I don't know, a 30th remaining. Well, a little more after the death wears off or something. And for some reason I had made the decision to unequip the raw meat dumplings. So this little bit of health was literally all I had left to work with. But actually this has a really easy and obvious solution. I mean, if making mistakes is the problem, then the solution is to simply not make any mistakes. Pretty much the same reason I don't have any children. Well, one of the reasons, I suppose. See, and that is what some patience, skill and a +10 spear allows you to do. Ow. Oops. I actually did forget to use the +10 stone. Huh. I don't know, maybe I fried only one hemisphere of my brain. At this point I cannot really tell anymore. In fact, given what happened next, I truly felt like I was losing my mind and couldn't tell what was real anymore. Perhaps this game has a hidden insight meter a la Bloodborne that makes you more susceptible to frenzy, or allows you to see deep into the very code of the matrix of this digital world itself. After all, I obviously wanted to do the fight against Otto Omniscient before curing the Frenzy Flame, because he is one of the few bosses that can be frenzied. However, what was going on here? There was no introductory speech, even though this is the first time I entered the arena. I mean, there was clearly no fog wall yet. In fact, there is no fog wall now either. Anywhere. At all. Nor any boss music. What the hell happened here? Look, I'm actually standing outside of the arena. That's not supposed to happen. So either I truly have lost my mind, or I encountered some weird kind of glitch. I'm at a loss. Either way, what a sad state of affairs. Well, be that as it may, before dethroning the first Elden Lord, my goal was to restore Vyke to his prime. Well, Vyke is dead by my own hands, but you know what I mean. So that means I had to finish Millicent's questline in the Helix Tree, which would unfortunately have to include defeating her sister Malenia. But to be fair, even getting there at all already was quite an issue. Because Loretta was an even worse knight on horseback to deal with than the Draconic Tree Sentinel. And surprisingly, her fire defenses are just as high for whatever reason. But whereas I at least had some sense of strategy against the Tree Sentinel, in Loretta's case it was literally a complete RNG crapshoot. Basically, whenever I didn't take damage, it was nothing but pure luck, where she just happened to miss or jump away. Basically, my health bar carried me through this fight. So you see why I don't choose to just arbitrarily level up, especially Vigor, because otherwise that probably would have applied to most boss fights in this playthrough. Now, of course, because of how Malenia is designed, that is a whole different story, as you cannot just tank your way through that fight in the first place. However, before dealing with Malenia, I had to finish her sister's questline, which unfortunately requires you to deal with one of the 10 billion ulcerated tree spirits in this game, inside of a miniature lake of rot. Because why not, right? So yeah, I decided to switch back to the Flame of Frenzy for this one. And I had still no iota of a damn clue what the hell was even happening. That's not completely true. In fact, let me give you a detailed dissection of the ulcerated tree spirit's moveset. He flails around a lot. Okay, there you go. Or if you want a more concise summary, whoosh 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 raw. Well, at least the invaders were easily frenzied out of existence, but unfortunately, no matter what you do, Millicent decides that her existence needs to end as well, as she allows the Scarlet Rot to do what it does so well. What a shame, she was a good lady. What a rotten way to die. Regardless, nowhere near as rotten as the ways I would die over and over again against her sister. Now, you might think that with the Frenzied Flame incantations, it would actually be possible to cheese Malenia. And that is kinda true, but if you're thinking about Unendurable Frenzy, that happens to be one of the spells that Vyke doesn't use, so it's not part of my arsenal, nor would I likely have the setup and stats to get that much damage out of it anyway, not to mention the madness build-up upon myself, because of Vyke's armor. However, there is an alternative using the Frenzy Burst, because you can simply spam that one from a distance. But you know, that's also kinda boring, so let's see how well we do with the Spear's weapon art. Well, the damage output is actually quite good. I mean, Malenia is weak to fire after all, so that's a plus. But against her we have an additional need to avoid damage as much as possible, because of her healing ability. And here's where I encountered two main issues. One is that even though this attack is similar to a jump attack, it most definitely isn't one. Malenia will not swing over your head during your recovery animation, which is how you would automatically avoid a lot of her sword swings when using jump attacks. Because as most of you know, I use jump attacks a lot against Malenia. Maybe a little bit too much, in fact. In fact, the second issue was my muscle memory. Because again, it is not a jump attack. So the timing is very different. Not to mention the general issues of our hyper armor attacks. And who could forget the waterfall dance, which she apparently is extra likely to do when you're using weapon arts exclusively. Or at the very least she did it way more often than usual in this playthrough. And even though I do have Bloodhound Step in my inventory since the beginning, it's not part of my setup, so that's not an option either. Now there is one saving grace here, to an extent, and that's that the initial jump, at least at point blank range, will push her back, causing a mini stagger, which buys you a little extra time, especially because the fire AoE can stun her as well. Emphasis on can, because, once more, sometimes she has hyper armor. And as you probably already would have expected, the timing issues are 10 times worse in her second phase. where she becomes twice as aggressive and you get punished 10 times as hard because of the Scarlet Rot explosions, or just the build-up in general. The thing is that I need that mini stagger from the initial jump, but it was simply never truly guaranteed. Wow, I wasn't exactly expecting it to be easy, but this is a really rough fight this way. And especially frustrating since you're fighting against your own muscle memory. Yeah, it might be helpful to come back to this later, because before we rid ourselves of the Frenzied Flame, there are still a few things that we need to do. After all, once we have Miquella's needle, we need to use it in the arena of the Elden Lord. And although technically it's not even required to defeat him, apparently, but if you're going to insert a needle into yourself, it's better to make sure that there are no witnesses around. Well, unless it's because you're diabetic or something, I guess. But regardless, defeating Plasudasax would provide me with a ton of runes. And it actually turns out that fighting him with this attack isn't even all that different from a regular melee fight. Because this is a very slow moving boss with large attack windows. In fact, you can even attack in between lightning strikes. On top of that, for whatever reason, even though he's a dragon, he is not specifically resistant to fire. Moreover, he is weak to thrust damage. So we do bonus damage with the actual spear thrust itself. Although I guess you shouldn't call that bonus damage. That would apply to ancient dragon weapons, and Vyke spear is obviously not one of those. Regardless, that wouldn't have helped against Plasudasax to begin with, because even though he is ancient and he is a dragon, he is not regarded as an ancient dragon. Yeah, I have no idea what they were thinking when they made that decision. In fact, not even his Dragon Breath incantation gets a boost from the Gravelstone seal. Also great decision, as if it wasn't 10 times more awkward to use than this attack. Maybe I will have to do a run focused around that incantation at some point. Anyway, before returning to Malenia, I decided to clean up everything else I would need to do before facing Godfrey as old school Vyke. So I quickly took care of Via's Sim Squad. Yeah, not exactly a whole lot to say about that one. Mind-numbing for me and, let's say mind-expanding for them. And although the real Loretta was insanity-inducing for me, the spirit version has so little health that even the water in our arena didn't have enough time to quench the devouring fury of my frantically burning flames of frenzy. And against the Mimic tier, since he's essentially me, I could inflict frenzy upon myself as well as inflicting frenzy upon myself. And the funny thing was that I still had the raw meat dumplings equipped, so my copy literally started off the fight by poisoning himself. Look at this buffoon. Wow, I'm such a dumbass. Wait, what? Yeah, speaking of which, I finally decided to stop being a dumbass and actually make sure I had the maximum amount of flasks, since I still was one short at this point. And I was probably going to need it, because if we truly want to surpass Vyke, we will need to defeat his beloved dragon Lanciax. And to be honest, I don't think I've ever fought this boss before. So I had absolutely no clue what the hell I was doing. However, apparently I didn't even have to. Because unbeknownst to me, Lanciax is basically nothing more than discount Fortisax. Her moveset is literally nothing more than a limited version of Fortisax. And without the lightning shield and death lightning around the arena. And just like her big brother, I think, I'm actually not sure if it's Fortisax or big brother. But she doesn't seem to be skilled for endgame. Of course, there were still some relatively close calls, simply because I'm not even that familiar with Fortisax either. Regardless, just like Vyke in his prime, and Vyke corrupted by the Frenzied Flame, we laid his beloved Lanciax to rest in his... yeah, let's just say in his honor. I mean, he's dead already, so it's not like he's going to complain or anything. Oh, oops. Okay, that wasn't me. It was the dragon who killed that sheep. If I'm lying, then may Vyke's spirit from the great beyond strike me down where I stand. Well, as you would expect, Fortisax was essentially the same thing as the Lanciax fight, just with more lightning. So, once again, no idea what I was doing, but my health bar was just sufficient enough to allow me to survive. Granted, just barely. I initially thought about using Via's Blessing in the fight itself for the extra poise, which I actually never have done before. And I'm not even sure if that would have helped, and based how little health I had left after taking a double hit from a lightning strike followed by a Fortisax thwomp, then if I had saved it for later on in the fight, then I'm pretty sure that the snuggle tags would have killed me. Regardless, 46 goes down on the first try, just from attacking at random basically. Yeah, even though this boss looks absolutely amazing, no matter under which circumstances I fight him, I'm always kinda disappointed. When I win, I feel like I shouldn't have won, but when I die, I feel like I died to complete bullshit. Regardless, all that remained now was to acquire Miquella's needle. So I had no choice but to return to the misery of Malenia's maniacal massacre. So, before we rid ourselves of the Frenzied Flame for good, we will still need its power to take Malenia down. But of course the question is, how are we going to achieve that? Because a couple of extra levels since the previous encounter are not going to win the fight for me. Well, I did find out a strategy that could work in theory. But once again, not something that was viable in practice. However, speaking of practice, I did eventually get the timings down and got rid of the hindrance of my muscle memory to at least allow me to get through the first phase taking minimal damage. But in the end, that would make no difference if I couldn't find a way to deal with the second phase. Well, there is one way to get a safe attack in, and that's to roll through the rod explosion and then immediately do the weapon art from directly behind her. That way you will get the mini stagger and you'll have enough time to dodge any counterattack that you could do. Except for one. And that is exactly why this strategy was ultimately meaningless. Because not only is Malenia more likely to do the waterfall dance when you constantly use this weapon art, but when she does it, it's over. There's no way out of it. Now, you might be familiar with this particular turnaround technique to dodge the waterfall at point blank range, but not even that could save me because I simply could not recover in time to even start moving in time. In fact, even if I had Bloodhound Step, or heck even Freezing Pots, it still wouldn't have made a difference. So at any point in the fight, after my attack, Malenia could insta-kill me with a waterfall. And I wouldn't even be able to move in time. So once I realized that, I was like, well, screw this then. I'm just going to cheese her with my mind's eye. So yeah, in the first phase I could literally just keep firing eye fire from across the arena. And for some reason this is the type of projectile that she isn't designed to dodge, meaning I could even charge it for extra damage. However, in the second phase she becomes really aggressive and constantly tries to close the distance. So now you do have to make sure that you don't charge anymore, unless you really know it's safe. And definitely watch out for when she swoops down followed by the stab, because that has way more range than you would expect. But you know, other than that, it's basically a cheese tactic at this point, and nothing can really go wrong. Huh? What the frick? Really? Damn, they probably asked Miyazaki how much damage Malenia should do, and his response was, "Hi." Okay, but you know, it's still a cheese tactic, so what the hell is this? Are you kidding me right now? Are you freaking serious? I'm using a freaking cheese tactic, how can I still die like this? You know, when you feel frustration like this, it might be a good idea to look out of your window on such a bright and beautiful day. Observe those gentle clouds swaying on the breeze. Take a deep breath and remind yourself of all the good things in life. Freaking finally! Son of a lady who sells her body for money behind a window in Amsterdam. But now, our quest has come to an end, as we can claim Miquella's needle to end our curse to end our curse. And therefore, it's time to go to the heart of the storm beyond time itself and subdue this meddling outer god, to rid ourselves of the flame of frenzy. Let this festering fingerprint return to the champion of dragons that he once was. Well, he's dead now by our own hands, but, you know, us in his place. You know, I've actually never seen what happens when you use this needle. So, let's see what FromSoft has in store for us at the end of this incredibly adventurous questline. That's it. You know, I'm done with this. Let's get this shitefest over with. So, here's our final setup. Vyke in his former glory. Although, unfortunately, you cannot obtain his original spear. So, as a substitute, I chose the partisan instead. I first thought to use the pike, because, you know, it rhymes with... yeah. The partisan is good enough, I guess. And we can buff ourselves with Vyke's Dragon Lightning, which also adds lightning damage to the Storm Assault weapon art. At the cost of lowering your own lightning defenses for some reason, even though it would have made more sense if it increases your lightning defenses, given that you are literally lighting yourself on lightning. But whatever, none of the remaining bosses inflict lightning damage to begin with. Also, for whatever reason, it raises your equip load, so it makes you weigh less. Huh? Why? It's not gravity magic. Well, then again, I guess it makes sense that if you light yourself on lightning, that you're lightning yourself. Or something. I don't have a freaking clue. I'm kinda done anyway with this nonsense at this point. Fortunately, the weapon art is essentially the same, minus the lingering fire, but with the additional lightning damage. Which is less impressive than I would have expected, to be honest. In fact, even Vortex's lightning bolts don't do that much. But they do have the benefit of raising you above the shockwaves. I guess I should have acquired the Gravelstone seal for 15% extra damage, but I don't think you can even acquire it anymore at this point in the game. So perhaps that was the issue. Because I know that these kinds of incantations can be incredibly powerful. Well, at least Godfrey's first phase wasn't much of an issue. But once he goes Gigachat mode, it becomes clear that being Elden Lord means having some pretty big boots to fill, and he's making us lick the ones he's wearing. So I tried switching to my lightning bolts instead to give myself a reach advantage. But again, I don't think my build is exactly well optimized. And once he's in his final phase, then we not only have to worry about his relentless attacks, but he has more stomp attacks with AoEs around them than the average Nier Replicant boss fight. Well, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but pretty close to at least a single one of those bosses. Sort of. I think I'm being Captain Obvious here, but it's pretty clear that I have no idea what exactly to do. This would have to come down to luck rather than strategy, and hoping that he would die before I would. Okay, I won. Yeah, I'm just as confused as you are. Well, of course, we still have the ultimate shite show left before we can truly claim the throne. And Radagon went about as well as you would expect. But despite his relentless combos, when you're on the ground, his attacks will in fact go over your head. And when he does his charge holy attack, you can attack him from behind. But regardless, I would still have to tank so many hits that the real problem was the Elden Beast. And not so much the actual fight itself, but simply that I would have to do it with very little resources left. Now, at least the damage against the beast was at least at acceptable levels, so that was quite an uplifting experience. But still, getting through this with only a few more flasks remaining was the true test to see if Vyke 2.0, or 3.0 I suppose, or 3.1 after curing the Frenzied flame, whatever it may be. But at least I was smart enough to save my other remaining flask, the of Wondrous Physic variety, for the Crimson World tier, to help me deal with not just the Elden Stars, but any ranged attack that the Elden Beast does in the meantime will be pure elemental damage as well. So as long as you don't take a hit from his actual sword, as long as the flask is active, you're essentially immortal. In fact, you will get a small amount of health back in the process. Regardless, would that be enough to finally turn Vyke, that obscure character who still features upon the actual cover artwork of the game itself, to finally become the Elden Lord he was always meant to be? I guess, if my interpretation of the lore is even remotely correct, that is. And that's kinda unlikely. And there we are. That's how Vyke finally became the Elden Lord. Well, we did, and we killed him. But whatever. If you enjoyed this playthrough, consider liking, subscribing, commenting. And if you want to support the channel, you can become a member. Or if you want early access to new videos, you can support the channel on Patreon. Thanks for watching, and I will see you all next time.